The humidity in Port St. Joe, Florida, on June 15, 1989, was a physical weight, the kind of heavy, wet heat that sticks to your skin the second you step out of the air conditioning. It was just another Thursday afternoon at the junior food store. People were stopping in for milk, lottery tickets, or a few gallons of gas, lost in the mundane rhythm of their own lives. One woman pulled into the lot, her mind likely on her to-do list, and noticed a white, windowless Toyota cargo van parked in the space next to her. It was an unremarkable vehicle, but there was something about the way it sat there silent and sealed off from the world that felt out of place in the bright Florida sun. When she walked out of the store a few minutes later, the van was pulling away, its engine a low hum that faded as it turned onto the main road. But in the space where that van had just been, something caught her eye. It was a Polaroid photograph lying face down on the hot black asphalt. She reached down to pick it up, probably thinking it was a lost family memory or a discarded snapshot. As she flipped it over, her world stopped. She wasn't looking at a vacation photo. She was looking at a scene of absolute terror. In the frame of that small, white-bordered picture, two children were staring back at her. A young woman and a younger boy, both lying on a blue-striped pillow and matching sheets in what looked like the cramped, dark cargo area of a van. Their hands were yanked behind their backs, bound tight, but it was their faces that stayed with her. Both had thick black duct tape pulled across their mouths and were sealing away any hope of a scream. Their eyes were wide, filled with a raw, pleading fear that seemed to vibrate off the glossy paper. The woman didn't just see a crime, she felt it. This was the nightmare every parent carries in the back of their mind, found in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon errand. She took the photo to the police, and within weeks the image was burned into the collective consciousness of America. When the show, A Current Affair, broadcast the picture in July of 1989, the phones at the Valencia County Sheriff's Office in New Mexico started ringing off the hook. Friends of the Dole family were frantic. "Patty, you have to turn on the television," they told her. "There's a girl. She looks just like Tara." Patty Doll sat in front of her television set, her heart hammering against her ribs as the image filled the screen. She didn't see a stranger. She saw her daughter. She recognized the hairline, the cowlick, and a specific scar on the woman's leg that matched an injury Tara had suffered in a car accident years before. And then there was the book. Lying next to the girl in the van was a paperback copy of My Sweet Adrena by V.C. Andrews, Tara's favorite book by her favorite author. There was even a phone number scrawled on the spine of the book, though the ink was blurred and broken, a taunting clue that led nowhere. The discovery ignited a firestorm of questions. Witnesses in Port St. Joe even claimed they had seen a girl matching the photo walking along the beach, appearing to take verbal orders from a group of men who watched her every move. It felt like Tara was right there, way just out of reach, held captive in a mobile dungeon that was moving through the southern United States. But here's the thing that makes this case so haunting as we sit here in February 2026. For decades, that photo was the only lead the public cared about. It was the unsolved Polaroid, a mystery that launched 1,000 theories. Yet while the world was looking for a white van in Florida, the real monsters might have been hiding in the shadows of Tara's own backyard in Belen, New Mexico. The investigation has taken a sharp, definitive turn in the last few years. We aren't just talking about old theories anymore. In September 2025, forensic teams were back in Valencia County, lowering specialized fly traps into abandoned mine shafts. Traps designed to find the specific insects that only gather where human remains are hidden. The clock is finally ticking for the people who thought they had gotten away with it. After 37 years of silence, the case has been handed over to District Attorney Barbara Romo. The names are sealed, the evidence is secured, and the girl on the pink bicycle is finally coming home to get her justice. Before we dive into the dark secrets of Valencia County, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss our deep dives into the cases that the world tried to forget. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. To really grasp how a photograph in a Florida parking lot could be tied to a missing girl in the high desert, we have to look at the life that was left behind in New Mexico. Belen was the kind of town where the desert sun bleaches the fences and the wind carries the scent of dry brush and railway grease. In the late 1980s, it felt like a safe place. It was the kind of community where you didn't think twice about a teenager heading out for a long ride on a rural highway. But 19-year-old Tara Calico didn't just disappear. She was torn out of a world she had built with careful, military-like precision. Her family called her Teeny Tara, a nickname that felt a little ironic if you knew her. She wasn't small in spirit or ambition. Tara was a sophomore at the University of New Mexico, a psychology major who also worked a full-time job at a local bank. Most 19-year-olds are still trying to figure out how to manage a schedule, but Tara was different. She was a creature of habit, a girl who lived her life by organized checklists. She was the type of person who would alphabetize the spice rack just because she liked the order of it. By the time she was 6 years old, she was already making her own breakfast and taking care of her own needs without a single word of prompting from her parents. She was a natural leader, an artist, and a dedicated athlete. On that Tuesday morning, September 20th, 1988, the sky was that deep, endless New Mexico blue. The air was still crisp before the desert heat really started to bake the pavement. Tara was preparing for her routine 36-mile bike ride, a grueling trip she took almost every single day for exercise. Often her mother, Patty Doll, would ride beside her. They were a pair, two women pedaling through the solitude of the valley. But in the months leading up to that September morning, a shadow had started to follow them. Patty had recently stopped riding with her daughter. She had developed an uneasy feeling that she couldn't quite name, a prickling on the back of her neck that wouldn't go away. She told family members that she felt she was being stalked by a motorist on that highway. There was a driver who watched them a little too closely, lingering in the rear-view mirror just a bit too long. Patty was so shaken by it that she actually urged Tara to start carrying mace for protection. Tara was young and felt she was untouchable. She laughed it off. She didn't think she needed mace. She was fast, she was strong, and this was her home. There were other warning signs, too. For months before she vanished, when someone had been leaving threatening notes on Tara's vehicle, they were weird, unsettling messages that the family initially dismissed as high school drama or some jealous peer trying to get a reaction. In a tragedy of errors, those notes eventually vanished from the evidence record, lost in the decades of mishandling that defined the early years of the case. At the time, they were just an annoyance. Looking back, they feel like a countdown. On that Tuesday morning, Tara was in a hurry. She had a tennis match scheduled with her boyfriend at 12:30, and she wanted to get her miles in before the sun got too high. She went to grab her bike, but the tire was flat. Not wanting to waste time on a repair, she reached for her mother's bicycle instead. It was a neon pink Huffy mountain bike. It was a loud, unmistakable flash of color that would stand out for miles against the tan and gray of the desert sand. It had yellow control cables and yellow sidewalls on the tires. Tara dressed for the heat. She put on a white t-shirt with the logo of the First National Bank of Belen. She wore white shorts with green stripes and turquoise and white Avias sneakers. She was a girl who cared about the small things, even when she was just going out to sweat. She put on her gold butterfly ring with a diamond insert, her gold amethyst ring, and her favorite gold hoop earrings. Before she left the house on Brugge Street at 9:30, she checked her Walkman. She had her headphones and a cassette tape by the band Boston. Music was her fuel on those long, lonely stretches of Highway 47. She told her mother that if she wasn't back by noon, Patty should come looking for her. It was a half joke, a way to make sure her mom knew when to expect her home so they could make it to the tennis match. "I'm serious, Mom," she said as she headed out. "Come and get me if I'm not back." Patty watched her daughter pedal away, a splash of neon pink moving toward the horizon. It was the last time she would ever see her. Witnesses saw Tara at various points during her ride. Around 11:30, she was spotted on the final leg of her return trip, heading north on Highway 47 back toward Belen. She was only about 2 miles from her front door. She had her headphones on, likely lost in a song, completely oblivious to the danger that was inches away. Behind her, a dirty white or light gray 1950s-style Ford pickup truck with a handmade camper shell was crawling along. Well, the truck was moving slowly, staying exactly 40 feet behind her, pacing her like a predator. Multiple people saw this vehicle. One witness, Ishmael de la Rosa, noticed something even more disturbing. He saw a man behind the wheel, a middle-aged guy with bright reddish-brown hair and a puffy face. But there was also someone else. Ishmael reported seeing a person actually running alongside the truck, crouched over as if they were hiding or waiting for a signal. Ishmael also noticed something that would later ignite a firestorm of local theories. Hanging in the back of the truck were several pressed khaki shirts. They were the kind of shirts you only see on members of law enforcement or county officials. When Ishmael later tried to give his statement to the authorities, he felt a strange hesitation from the department. It was the first sign that the people supposed to find Tara might be the very people protecting the ones who took her. Noon arrived. The heat was shimmering off the asphalt, and the town of Belen was quiet. Patty Dole sat in her house watching the clock. 12:05 came, and there was no sign of the pink bicycle. Patty didn't wait. She knew her daughter's habits too well. She got into her car and began to retrace the route south along the railroad tracks. She expected to see Tara walking the bike home with another flat tire. She expected to see her tired but smiling. Instead, as she drove down Highway 47, she saw something small and dark lying in the dirt. She pulled over and her heart dropped. It was the Boston cassette tape. A few yards away, she found the broken pieces of the Sony Walkman. It looked like they had been smashed or dropped with force. Patty stood there in the desert silence, holding the broken plastic of her daughter's life. There were bike tracks in the dirt that led to the edge of the road, and then they just stopped. Nearby, she saw the heavy tread of a motor vehicle and a fresh oil slick. The neon pink Huffy was gone. Tara was gone. The girl who made her own breakfast and alphabetized her spices had been erased from the road, leaving behind nothing but a trail of breadcrumbs and a mother's worst nightmare. To understand the moment Tara Calico was taken, you have to imagine the silence of Highway 47 on a Tuesday morning in 1988. This wasn't a busy interstate. It was a ribbon of asphalt cutting through miles of dry brush and ranch land, where the only sound was the wind and the occasional hum of a passing car. At 9:30 that morning, Tara pedaled away from her home, heading south for what she thought would be a standard 2-hour ride. She was wearing her headphones, the music of the band Boston filling her head, creating a wall of sound that blocked out the world around her. She was fast, she was focused, and she was in her own bubble of safety. But that bubble was about to be shattered. By 11:45 in the morning, Tara was on the return leg of her ride, only about 2 miles from her house. She was pedaling north, her home almost within sight. 7 different witnesses would later tell police they saw her at this exact time. They all remembered the girl on the neon pink bike. But what they remembered even more vividly was the dirty white, or maybe light primer gray, 1953 Ford pickup truck that was tailing her. It wasn't just following her, it was stalking her. The witnesses said the truck was crawling along, staying exactly 40 feet behind her rear tire. That is a terrifyingly small distance, less than the length of a semi-trailer. Think about that for a second. Tara is pedaling, her heart rate up, her music loud, completely unaware that a man is sitting behind a steering wheel just a few feet away, matching her every move. He is watching the rhythm of her legs, waiting for the perfect stretch of road where the houses disappear and the desert takes over. One witness, Ishmael de la Rosa, saw something that makes the hair on your arms stand up. As he watched the truck and the bike, he noticed a person running alongside the vehicle. This person wasn't just jogging. They were crouched over, staying low next to the truck as it moved, almost like a hunter staying out of sight of their prey. It suggests a level of coordination that goes way beyond a random accident. Within 2 hours of Tara failing to show up for her tennis match, the search was in full swing. Her mother, Patty, was already out on the road, her eyes scanning the ditches. Near the railroad tracks, she spotted something that didn't belong in the sand. It was a cassette tape. She pulled over, her heart in her throat, and picked it up. It was a tape by the band Boston. It was Tara's. A little further down the road, she found fragments of broken plastic. Pieces of the Sony Walkman Tara had been listening to just an hour before. For years. And the story was that Tara had dropped these items on purpose, a desperate attempt to mark her trail as she was being forced into that truck. But there is a secret in the redacted reports that the public was never supposed to hear. Years later, a deeper forensic analysis of those items was conducted. The results were a punch to the gut for the family. Investigators eventually determined that the Walkman fragments in the cassette tape found on the side of the road might not have belonged to Tara Calico at all. If that's true, it means the entire initial search was focused on a staged crime scene. It means the perpetrators were smart enough to plant evidence to lead the police in the wrong direction. Or worse, they were using those items to taunt the people looking for her. As the search widened, the leads started to get even darker. During a drug investigation at a nearby motel shortly after the disappearance, a detective made a discovery that should have blown the case wide open. Inside one of the rooms, they found a suitcase. When they opened it, they didn't find clothes or money. They found a tangled mess of telephone wire. In a case where a girl was likely bound and abducted, a suitcase full of wire at a local motel is the kind of evidence you never ignore. Yet in a move that still baffles and angers investigators today, a detective on the scene took that suitcase and destroyed the evidence. It was never logged. It was never tested for DNA. It was just gone. It's one of the many systemic failures that Melinda Esquivel and other investigators point to when they talk about a cover-up in Valencia County. But the most haunting piece of the puzzle comes from a witness who saw something that sounds like a scene from a horror movie. This witness, who has since passed away, claimed that on the morning Tara vanished, they saw a group of people waiting in the brush along Highway 47. It wasn't just one man in a truck. They reported seeing 4 or 5 young men and one woman standing together, waiting in Tara's direct path. This changes everything. If this witness was right, Tara didn't just have the bad luck of crossing paths with a predator. She was being intercepted by an organized group. They were waiting for her to come around that bend. They knew her route, they knew her time, and they had a plan. Then there is the story of Ishmael de la Rosa. He didn't just see the truck, he saw the man. He described a middle-aged, white male with bright reddish-brown hair, bloodshot eyes, and a puffy face. He even noticed a scar running from the man's left eye to his temple. Ishmael was so certain of what he saw that he agreed to be placed under hypnosis by the police to pull out more details. Under the trance, he picked a man out of a photo lineup. He was sure this was the driver. Captain Ray Flores, the detective in charge, set up a meeting with Ishmael for the very next day to go over the identification and start the process of making an arrest. Ishmael showed up at the station, ready to help bring Tara home. But Captain Flores never walked through the door. He didn't show up for the meeting. He didn't answer Ishmael's follow-up calls. He just went silent. Ishmael wouldn't hear from the detective again for nearly a year. And by then, the trail was as cold as the desert at midnight. The red-haired man, the Primer gray truck, and the suitcase full of wire were allowed to slip into the fog of small-town secrets. As the sun set on that first day in September 1988, The people of Belen were looking at the horizon, hoping to see a neon pink bicycle pedaling home. But the only thing moving on Highway 47 was the dust. The breadcrumbs left in the dirt were starting to look more like a trap. And the people who were supposed to be the hunters were already acting like they were afraid of what they might find. This case is a labyrinth of theories. If you appreciate the level of detail we bring to these investigations, please give this video a like. It helps the algorithm share Tara's story with those who might still hold the final piece of the puzzle. What time is it there as you're listening to this? The photo triggered a media firestorm that wouldn't quit. Programs like Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted ran segments on the girl in the van, and the FBI was flooded with tips. Some witnesses in Florida even claimed they had seen a young woman matching the girl in the photo walking along the beach in Port St. Joe shortly before the picture was found. They said she was accompanied by several white men who seemed to be giving her verbal orders, treating her more like property than a person. It felt like Tara was alive, held in some mobile prison, moving across the American South. But as the scientists got involved, the story began to fracture. The forensic analysis of the Polaroid became a war of conflicting opinions. Scotland Yard in the United Kingdom examined the photo using feature-matching techniques and concluded that the woman was, in fact, Tara Calico. Even so, the Los Alamos National Laboratory disagreed. One of their forensic scientists stated that the woman was definitely not Tara, citing anatomical differences that didn't quite line up. The FBI's own lab was the final tiebreaker, but they came back with a finding that was essentially useless, inconclusive. And then there was the bombshell from the Polaroid Corporation. They looked at the chemical signatures and the film stock used to take the picture. Their experts determined that the specific film wasn't even available for purchase until May of 1989. This created a massive timeline problem. If the girl in the photo was Tara, she had been held captive for at least 8 months. If the photo was taken in Florida in June, it meant the kidnappers had transported her over 1,200 miles across state lines. The mystery only deepened when people looked at the spine of the My Sweet Audrina book in the photograph. There appeared to be a phone number scrawled there in ink. Authorities tried to track it down, but the numbers were blurred and broken. Experts estimated there were 300 possible combinations of that number. And although they tracked down 57 valid ones, every single lead resulted in a dead end. For years, the Florida Polaroid was the face of the Tara Calico case. It was the hook that kept the public interested, the unsolved mystery that defined a generation of true crime fans. But as we look at the case with 2026 eyes, the perspective has shifted dramatically. Modern investigators and people like Melinda Esquibel, who has spent over 10 years digging into the original files, believe the photo was nothing more than a giant distraction. They now think it was a red herring, perhaps a cruel prank or a photo of a different crime entirely, that sucked up thousands of hours of investigative time and millions of dollars in resources. While the nation was looking for a white Toyota van in the Florida humidity, the people responsible for Tara's disappearance were likely sitting comfortably in their homes back in New Mexico, watching the media frenzy with a sense of relief. The photo heard round the world may have been the very thing that allowed a small-town secret to remain buried for nearly 40 years. As the case moves toward the district attorney's office today, the Polaroid has been pushed to the background. Scientific analysis conducted in 2023 has reinforced the idea that the image was a distraction from the real leads in Valencia County. Even with the heartbreak of a mother who died believing she had seen her daughter's face one last time, the truth seems to lie not in a Florida parking lot, but in the red dirt of New Mexico. The girl in the van remains unidentified, a ghost in the machine of a much larger, darker story. When the Florida Polaroid surfaced, it felt like the first breath of air after 9 months of drowning in silence. But as the years turned into decades, that photograph and the others that followed began to look less like a lifeline and more like a series of ghostly faces designed to haunt a grieving family. These decoys became a secondary tragedy in the Tara Calico case. They pulled the energy of the world toward Florida, California, and even the interior of an Amtrak train, while the truth sat frozen in the New Mexico dust. The first major blow to the Polaroid theory arrived in June of 1990, and it was a story that broke the hearts of two different families at once. For over a year, and many people, including federal investigators, believed the young boy in the back of the van was Michael Henley. Michael was only 9 years old when he vanished from a New Mexico campsite in April of 1988. He disappeared just months before Tara, and he was only about 75 miles away from her. His parents were so convinced by the image that they joined Patty Dole in a shared mission to find their children. They stood together on national television, two families bound by a single, terrifying picture. That shared hope ended in the Zuni Mountains. Hunters walking through the high timber found Michael Henley's remains. He wasn't in a van in Florida. He was only 7 miles from where he had first wandered away from his family. Forensic teams determined he had died of exposure shortly after he got lost in the forest. He was never kidnapped. He was never bound with tape. The boy in the Polaroid was a stranger, and the link between the two New Mexico cases vanished as quickly as it had appeared. For the Henley family, there was a terrible closure. For the Calicos, there was only the realization that the map they had been following for a year led to a dead end. As the Michael Henley theory collapsed, a new, even more unsettling specter emerged. David Parker Ray, the man known as the Toy Box Killer. Ray is one of the most prolific and horrific predators in American history, and his connection to the town of Belen was bone deep. He was born right there in town. His family owned a ranch situated near the very stretch of road where Tara was last seen. Ray was known for his toy box, a soundproof semi-trailer equipped with torture devices, and he was active in hunting during the late 1980s. Ray even shared a striking resemblance to the composite sketch of the red-haired man seen following Tara in the dirty white truck. It was a lead that felt almost too perfect to be a coincidence. But when the FBI finally arrested Ray in 1999 and combed through his meticulous, sadistic records, they hit a wall. Ray was a man who documented his crimes with terrifying precision, yet there was not a single mention of Tara Calico in his tapes or journals. He was a monster, but he wasn't Tara's monster. The investigators were forced to cross his name off the list, leaving the town of Belen to look back at its own neighbors once again. And the years continued to spit out more photographs that felt like taunts. In July of 1989, another Polaroid was found at a construction site in Montecito, California. It was a blurry image of a girl's face, her mouth covered by black tape, lying against a blue-striped fabric that looked identical to the pillow in the Florida photo. Patty Dole studied the image and saw her daughter's cowlick and her lazy eye. It felt like a confirmation that Tara was being moved across the country. Then came the Amtrak photo in February of 1990. This one was different, vile and confusing. It showed a woman wrapped loosely in gauze, her eyes covered with more bandages, wearing large black frame glasses. She was seated next to an unknown man on a train. Patty largely dismissed this one as a cruel hoax, but it added to the noise, the endless static of false hope that kept the real investigation from moving forward. The most bizarre ghost appeared decades later in 2009. The police chief in Port St. Joe received a series of letters postmarked from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Inside were pictures of a boy with sandy brown hair, but someone had used a black marker to draw a tape-like band over his mouth. It was a deliberate callback to the 1989 Polaroid, a calculated attempt to stir the pot 20 years after the fact. Police analyzed the letters, but like the gauze photo and the California snapshot, they led to a wall of silence. There was even a strange claim from the musician Marilyn Manson, who alleged that he used to drop stage. on disturbing photographs in Florida parking lots as part of a twisted prank during his early years in a band. Whether it was a high-profile musician or a local sociopath, the effect was the same. The truth was being buried under a mountain of stage horror. By 2023, modern scientific analysis finally allowed law enforcement to put these ghostly faces to rest. Current lead investigators have officially labeled the Polaroids as a distraction, a red herring that successfully sucked the time and attention of the FBI and local police away from the suspects back home. The photo heard round the world didn't help find Tara. It helped those who took her hide in plain sight for nearly 40 years. As we move into February of 2026, the investigation has finally stopped looking at the ghosts in the van and started looking at the men who never left the valley. While the national media was obsessed with the grainy faces in the Florida Polaroid, the people of Belen, New Mexico, were looking at each other. Small towns have a way of keeping secrets, burying them under layers of family loyalty and fear, until the truth feels like a ghost that everyone sees but no one wants to name. For over 20 years, the official story was a stranger danger kidnapping, a predator in a white van. But in 2008, the silence in Valencia County was finally broken by a man who had been at the heart of the system. Sheriff Rene Rivera stepped in front of the cameras and dropped a bombshell that the local community had been whispering about for decades, when he announced that he believed Tara Calico never left the county. She didn't end up in the back of a van in Florida. Instead, she was killed the very day she vanished, just miles from her own front door. Rivera claimed that a group of local boys, teenagers who knew Tara from school, were driving a truck that morning. They weren't looking for a victim. They were looking for a thrill. They started following her, trying to get her attention, shouting at her as she pedaled with her headphones on. In their reckless game of chicken, they pulled too close. The truck clipped the neon pink Huffy, and Tara was thrown into the red dirt. What happened next wasn't an accident. It was a choice. Panicked in realizing they had just injured a girl whose family had deep roots in the community, the boys didn't call for an ambulance. They didn't go to the police. They chose to protect themselves. According to the theory, they abducted the injured girl, took her to a remote grave pit, and when she threatened to tell the authorities what they had done, they murdered her. The names attached to this narrative weren't just random kids from the neighborhood. They were names that carried weight. At the center of the storm was Lawrence Romero, Jr. He was the son of the sitting sheriff at the time, Lawrence Romero, Sr. Jr. was a figure of local legend, a preppy cowboy who drove a BMW and allegedly controlled a significant drug ring in the area. He was the kind of kid who felt untouchable because his father held the keys to the county. People in Belen remembered him as a creep who could do no wrong in the eyes of the law. The details grew even more sickening when a man named Henry Brown came forward with a deathbed confession. Henry had spent years carrying a weight that was crushing him. He told investigators that he had been partying with Lawrence Romero Jr. and his buddies, men like Dave Silva and Leroy Chavez, in a makeshift basement beneath a mobile home. While they were down there, the talk turned to the missing girl. Henry claimed the men bragged about hitting her with the truck. They described taking her to a pit, raping her, and then stabbing her to death, while the others held her down to keep her from fighting back. Henry even claimed he saw the evidence with his own eyes. He told a story about Lawrence Romero Jr. showing him a shallow grave wrapped in a blue tarp inside that very basement. It was a scene that sounds like something out of a nightmare, but for the people of Valencia County, it felt like the missing piece of a puzzle they had been trying to solve since 1988. But why was nothing done? That is where the shadow of the big families comes in. The allegations of a cover-up are thick and heavy. Rumors persisted for years that a confession note written by Lawrence Romero Jr. had been found by his own father. Instead of turning his son in, the sheriff allegedly destroyed the note, erasing the evidence of a murder to save his family's reputation. The systemic failures didn't stop there. There was the mystery of the suitcase found during an unrelated drug bust at a local motel shortly after Tara went missing. Inside that suitcase was a tangled mess of telephone wire, the kind of thing used to bind a person. A detective on the scene looked at it, realized what it might be, and then did the unthinkable. He destroyed the evidence. He didn't log it. He didn't test it. He just made it disappear. It's these moments of lost reports and missing evidence that have fueled the fire of community rage for 37 years. The suspects themselves seem to be haunted by what they had done. Lawrence Romero Jr. died in 1991, just 3 years after Tara vanished. Depending on who you ask, he either took his own life or lost a deadly game of Russian roulette. Some say his father claimed he was murdered. But the rumors in town were different. They said he couldn't live with the ghost of the girl on the pink bicycle. Another suspect, Leroy Chavez, was later killed in an unrelated incident. One by one, the men who supposedly knew the truth were being taken to the grave, leaving behind a trail of hearsay and broken hearts. Even with the suspects dying off, the wall of silence in Belen held firm. People were afraid. They saw what happened to those who spoke up. They saw how the police department reacted to witnesses like Ishmael de la Rosa, whose statement was ignored and whose follow-up meetings were canceled by the detectives in charge. It was a community bound by a shared, dark understanding. You don't talk about the Romero family, and you don't talk about Tara Calico. Yet as we look at the case in 2026, that fear is finally losing its grip. The local theory is no longer just a rumor shared in hushed tones at the back of a diner. It is the primary focus of the current investigation. Modern detectives have spent the last few years piercing through the decades of protection. They are looking at the families who aided in the cover-up, the parents who helped hide the remains, and the people who are still alive today and have been living with this secret for nearly 40 years. The transition from the Florida Polaroid to the New Mexico dirt reflects a hard truth. Sometimes the monster isn't a stranger in a windowless van. Sometimes the monster is the boy from your class, the son of the lawman, or the neighbor you see every Sunday. The secrets in the valley are finally being dragged into the light, and the people of Belen are realizing that while you can bury a body, you can never truly bury the truth. Sean, we are finally approaching the moment of justice in this case. Share this video on social media. The more eyes we have on these cold cases, the harder it is for the truth to remain buried. What's the weather like today where you are? It's a stark contrast to the heat of that 1988 afternoon. The silence of Valencia County isn't what it used to be. For over 3 decades, that silence was a shield for the guilty, a heavy blanket of small-town secrets that seemed impossible to lift. But as we stepped into the 2020s, that shield began to rust. The transition from a stagnant cold case to a red-hot criminal pursuit didn't happen by accident. It was the result of a massive, quiet audit of every single scrap of paper in the file. In October 2020, the Rocky Mountain Information Network completed a 2-year analysis of the disappearance. They didn't just look at the old reports, they looked at the gaps, the things that were ignored, the leads that were buried, and the witnesses who were told to go home and forget what they saw. This fresh set of eyes led to a moment that shook Belen to its core. In September 2021, a convoy of New Mexico State Police and Valencia County Sheriff's vehicles pulled up to a private residence. They weren't there for a courtesy call. They were executing a sealed search warrant, a move based on modern leads that had finally pierced the wall of protection surrounding local suspects. The details of what they found inside that home remain locked away. But the message was clear. The people who thought they had outrun the clock were officially out of time. The momentum peaked on June 13, 2023. Sheriff Denise Vigil stood before a room full of reporters, her voice steady but carrying the weight of 35 years of community trauma. She announced that the investigation had made substantial progress. "I personally was not sure I would ever see the day of a significant breakthrough," she told the crowd. But I stand before you confident of the findings in this case. The sheriff dropped the biggest reveal yet. Law enforcement now believes they have sufficient evidence to submit the case to the district attorney's office for a review of criminal charges. But the pursuit of justice in a case this old is a fight against the calendar. In New Mexico, a murder has no statute of limitations, but other crimes do. Offenses like kidnapping, tampering with evidence, or helping to hide a body have time limits that expired long ago. This means the district attorney, Barbara Romo, has to build a case that doesn't just prove a disappearance. It has to prove a homicide beyond a reasonable doubt without the benefit of a body. The investigators have binders full of interviews and more than a dozen persons of interest. They know who did it. They believe they know what happened on that stretch of Highway 47. Now they have to make it stick in a courtroom. The search for physical proof reached a high-tech peak in September 2025. Forensic teams returned to the rugged landscape south of Belen, focusing on the dark, abandoned mine shafts that litter the area. And they used a technique that sounds like something out of a science fiction novel: specialized fly traps. These traps are designed to attract necrophagous insects, specific types of flies and beetles that are only found in environments where human remains are decomposing. By lowering these traps into the deep, unreachable cracks of the earth, scientists can detect the chemical and biological signatures of a body that has been hidden for decades. This isn't just about finding Tara. It is about using the very earth to testify against the men who thought they could bury their crimes in the desert. As we sit here in February 2026, the case is in its most critical phase. The names of the suspects are still sealed by a court order to protect the integrity of the pending indictments. And there are rumors that some of the primary offenders are still living in the community, walking the same streets as Tara's siblings, thinking they are safe because of who their fathers were. But the January 15, 2026 status hearing marked a turning point. The legal review is reaching its conclusion. The district attorney is methodically connecting the digital breadcrumbs, the modern DNA results, and the deathbed confessions that have finally come to light. The people of Belen are holding their breath. They are waiting for the moment those seals are broken and the names are read aloud. They are waiting to see if the big families of the county can still buy their way out of a murder charge, or if the truth is finally too loud to ignore. For 37 years, Tara Calico has been a face on a poster, a mystery in a Polaroid, and a ghost on a lonely highway. But the forensic fly traps, the sealed warrants, and the determination of a new generation of lawmen are bringing her home. The reckoning is no longer a distant hope. It is a knock on the door that is getting louder every single day. Patty Dole did not live to see the police cruisers pull up to that private residence in 2021, or the news cameras gather for the breakthrough announcement in 2023. She died on May 11, 2006, in a house in Port Charlotte, Florida, over 1,000 miles away from the red dirt of Belen. Her death was the result of complications from a series of strokes, but the people who knew her best said her heart had been failing since that Tuesday in 1988. Even when she moved across the country to start a new chapter with her husband John, she could not leave Tara behind. In her Florida home, she kept a bedroom perfectly made and ready for her daughter. Every year on Tara's birthday, she would go out and buy a gift. Every Christmas, another present was wrapped and placed under the tree. She lived in a state of permanent waiting, a purgatory where the hope for a phone call was the only thing that kept her moving through the silence of her own home. The tragedy of the Calico family did not stop with a single disappearance. In 2002, Tara's father, David Calico, was mugged and beaten in Albuquerque. He passed away from his injuries at the age of 64. Another life cut short by violence. Another parent who went to his grave without knowing where his child was buried. This is the human cost that gets lost in the headlines of true crime podcasts and television specials. We talk about the unsolved Polaroid and the red-haired man. But for the Calico family, these were not entertainment. They were shards of glass that cut a little deeper every time they were discussed. Tara is survived today by four siblings who have spent nearly 40 years carrying the torch. Her brother Chris was only a teenager when she vanished. Now he is a man in his 50s, still searching for the sister who was his protector and his friend. Her stepsister Michelle has dedicated years to the search, partnering with filmmaker Melinda Esquivel to record the podcast Vanished, the Tara Calico investigation. They have become the modern voices for a girl who was silenced on a highway. We're refusing to let the big families of Valencia County bury the truth along with the body. They have watched the suspects die off one by one, Lawrence Romero Jr. in 1991, Leroy Chavez later on, but they know that justice does not die with the perpetrator. As we sit here in February 2026, the case is in its most critical phase. The January 15 status hearing marked a massive shift in the legal landscape. We are no longer waiting for a lead, we are waiting for a gavel. District Attorney Barbara Romo has been handed a mountain of evidence that was decades in the making. The challenges are massive. Building a homicide case without a body is a steep climb in any courtroom. The defense will point to the lack of remains. They will point to the distraction of the Florida Polaroid. They will claim that the witnesses who are still alive have memories that have been clouded by time and local gossip. But the prosecution has something the original investigators did not. They have the modern DNA results from the search warrants. They have the biological signatures recovered from the mine shafts by those forensic fly traps in September 2025. Most importantly, they have the courage of a community that is finally done being afraid. The wall of silence that protected the Romero family and their associates for 37 years is not just cracked, it is coming down. The people of Belen are finally speaking the names they used to only whisper. The pursuit of justice in this case is a fight against the calendar. Most of the crimes related to the cover-up, the tampering with evidence, the lying to grand juries, with the helping to hide a body, fell under statutes of limitations that ran out long ago. This means the district attorney has to go for the big charges, first-degree or second-degree murder. Those are the only crimes that have no expiration date in New Mexico. The goal now is a sentence that finally matches the weight of the crime. Even if the primary offenders are no longer here to stand trial, the accomplices who are still walking the streets of Valencia County need to know that their time is up. There is a final haunting image that stays with everyone who follows this case. It is not the Polaroid from Florida. It is the image of a neon pink Huffy mountain bike with yellow cables and yellow sidewalls. That bike was a large, bright object, yet it was erased from the side of Highway 47 as if it never existed. Somewhere in the high desert, or perhaps in the back of a cluttered garage, that bike is still there. It is the ultimate piece of evidence, a silent witness that has outlasted the suspects and the parents. Tara Calico would be 56 years old today. She was a girl who lived by checklists and alphabetized her spices. She was a girl who loved the band Boston in psych classes and the rhythm of a 36-mile ride. She was a girl with a bright light around her that a group of reckless young men tried to extinguish in a moment of panic and cruelty. But you cannot kill a light like that. It has been burning for 37 years, and it is finally bright enough to reveal the faces of the people who took her. As the legal review concludes and we wait for the seals to be broken, we remember that this is not just a cold case. It is a promise. It is a promise to Patty and David that their daughter was not forgotten. It is a promise to the siblings that the truth matters. And it is a promise to the town of Belen that no secret is deep enough to stay buried forever. The girl on the pink bicycle is finally on her way home. Tara's story isn't over yet. We will continue to track the district attorney's progress and bring you updates as soon as the court unseals the names of the suspects. Thank you for joining us at Cold Cases Files. Until next time, stay vigilant.